We are now up to Learning Difficulties LD and Neurons, Part 2. So welcome back. So now I would like you to watch these two short clips. The first one is neurons, how they work. It's 4.5 minutes. Make sure you get to the right Discovery channel. I have the link here. If you can't click on it, then just type in what I wrote. And the same thing for the second one, what is myelin? It's less than a minute. So I'll also put it on our Moodle site for your convenience. Our brains are very complicated. There are, as I mentioned, 85 billion neurons that are all connecting, not all, but many of them are connecting to one another as you learn more, from becoming a baby to becoming an adult and whatever it is that you're learning until 120. Realize that your brain is not just one brain, it is made up of many different parts. So there could be injury to a single part, for example, during a stroke, where a person will lose the ability to speak because certain neurons in that stroke have lost blood and those neurons die. Realize that there's different parts, and students in your class have different kinds of areas in their brains that are stronger or less strong. Someone can be extremely visual, but not so auditory. They don't remember vocabulary, but they can spell perfectly. How's that? Well, because different parts of their brain have different strengths. The neurons in their visual area, the occipital lobe, for example, over here in the back, is very strong, probably hereditary. And whereas their auditory center is, those neurons fire off less, or they're less effective, less stimulated. So you don't need to memorize this, of course, but you need to realize that there are really specific areas in the brain that are responsible for different things that we do. The frontal lobe is specific to humans. It's where our language is. Our thinking, our concepts, our abstractness. Dogs don't have a forehead. Dogs don't have a frontal lobe. Dogs and animals, mammals, have other areas just like we do. They have a brain stem, temporal lobe, occipital lobe, vision even better than ours, cerebellum for balance and equilibrium, parietal, touch. Dogs, for example, can smell, I forget the number, 1,000,000 times better than we can. Their sense of smell, which is why their nose is wet, to make sure that those neurons really capture the cells of whatever it is that they're smelling. It goes right to their brain, and then they can identify what it is that they're smelling. We cannot. So obviously your brain is not colored like this ridiculous slide, but it definitely has special areas, and special areas in some of your learners don't work as well. If you have someone with dyslexia, the area for remembering words and being able to speak is often very strong. Those neurons work really well. But the area for remembering how to spell, the left hemisphere, some of the left hemisphere abstract, meaningless memory, and those neurons don't fire off so well. So spelling is pretty meaningless. It's just some rules that we made up. That's, you spell the word right, R-A-G-H-T, like what? Just have to remember it. So kids with dyslexia, those neurons don't fire off so well. And the trick is to engage other neurons that do fire off well. So if somebody cannot remember how to spell, they can remember silly humor about the word, or they can remember the clip that you saw last week about drawing pictures, visual spatial memory of words. In other words, just because a person can't remember one thing and those neurons don't work as effectively as they should, doesn't mean that other areas of the brain are not gifted or work just beautifully. And that is absolutely true. People with dyslexia are often CEOs of big companies, extremely smart, well-versed, good socially, but the reading is really hard. So if you think of it as a specific learning difficulty, it could help you as a teacher. I don't want to lead the witness here, but think about that. Specific areas don't always work well, but other areas do. The concept of automaticity we have from part one of the show of the PowerPoint. I spoke about it briefly. Automaticity is what you want to happen, and that's what learning is. It's called effective, efficient learning is automaticity. You don't have to think about how to drive. You just put it in gear. You can be listening to the radio. You can be eating a sandwich. You can be talking on the phone, not in your hand. And therefore, your driving is very effective. And that's what learning is all about. We want to remember the Richard Lavoie film where you want language to be automatic. You want automaticity for reading. Kids who are having difficulties, your struggling learners, have a problem with automaticity for reading or for recalling vocabulary or for spelling. They still have to use their frontal cortex. What do I write now? Which letter do I add? They're thinking as opposed to it being automatic. So on a neuron level, they have difficulties, and you need to help them, of course, and you need to be empathetic, of course, and you need to be gentle, and you need to understand that it's not their fault. And you need to understand that if you help them learn how to spell the word or how to remember the vocabulary word with other kinds of neurons, more meaningful neurons, in other words, those that deal with color if they're more visual, or a joke about the word if they're more verbal, jumping around and holding the word and playing with a ball while they are learning a word, more kinesthetic, depending on how that person learns. You need to ask, you need to see how they learn, you need to give them possibilities so that that word becomes automatic. So automaticity for reading. When you are a baby, you don't have automaticity when you walk. You have to think about it. That babies take about, I don't know, months and months and months before they walk. It's a struggle because the neurons all over their body are connecting and they're understanding balance and gravity and stepping and walking. It's a long time, and they finally get to automaticity of walking. The same thing with learning the letter B or the vocabulary or whatever you're doing. It's the exact same process. As a teacher, it's not magic. That's what you have from the first presentation. It really works on a neuron level, and I hope that you appreciate that. We are now going a little bit further into neurons and a concept that I find fascinating, which is called window of opportunity in the brain of neurons. It's in Hebrew, it's chalon hizdamnut, and that means that some neurons have an expiration date. If they're not stimulated before their expiration date, then they don't work properly ever. So for example, in sight with kittens, the expiration date of their visual neurons is about 6 weeks. So if a kitten is put into a dark room for 6 weeks and their neurons are not stimulated at all, and then they're taken out and given a lot of love and petted and all that, they will not be able to see. I watched a movie where kittens were put into a barrel individually with white lines going up and down. When they were taken out after 6 weeks, the neurons their eyes could only see items which were hanging. They would not see anything that was facing horizontally. And the same with horizontal white lines. Those kittens could not see something that was hanging from the ceiling. So it has nothing to do with the eye. It has to do with the neurons in the brain need to get stimulated the first 6 weeks of their lives. And with language, with humans, approximately by puberty, around 12, 13, give or take, if those language neurons are not stimulated in the brain, if somebody is totally deaf, is locked in a closet, you have kids who are locked in closets and do not hear language, or there are several books of people who've been found like in a forest and have not heard human language, then those neurons can never function properly. So they might be able to say blah, blah, but they will not be able to speak as we are speaking. So it's a window of opportunity. However, versus, that's why I put the VS, all of what you are teaching is not innate to the brain. It is culturally learned until the grave, until 120 years old. Riding a bike, if you didn't learn it when you were 6, you can learn it when you're 119 if you have good balance and good muscles. Reading, someone could come from a different country and be illiterate and not read and not know how to read. But if they have language, you could take them at age 60 and teach them how to read. There is no window of opportunity. So if you have a Kita Yud, a 10th grader in your class, who has never been taught to read, you can teach them to read. Clearly, if they have dyslexia, they have problems, that's a different story. But somebody with no learning disabilities or learning difficulties can read at any age at all. There's no window of opportunity. I think that's quite amazing, and I couldn't miss telling you about that. And our last slide about neurons and learning difficulties is when things go wrong. You know about these situations. However, you probably didn't think about them in relationship to neurons. So for example, in Alzheimer's, you may have seen Lorenzo's Oil movie that also is about something similar. But in Alzheimer's, you remember myelination? So you have the electrical impulses between neurons. They get myelin, the axon becomes myelinated. In Alzheimer, the myelin gets reabsorbed by the body. So the electrical impulses don't work well. They don't function anymore. So if the person knows where they live, of course, they're a mathematician, PhD, but they have Alzheimer's, that knowledge of where they live, all of those neurons involved in that knowledge demyelinate. So therefore, that electrical charge doesn't give the electrical charge anymore. So their memory goes because of the neurons and the demyelinization of those neurons. It works on that level. Remedia babies, the babies with the, it's like Materna, didn't have a certain vitamin. It affected the neurons. It affected the myelination of those neurons. And so there was retardation of these many babies, which was a tragedy. But that's a chemical level, a neuron level, and it has to do with learning and memory. And sometimes those things go wrong because the neurons are affected. In ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADD, attention deficit disorder, it's a lack of regulation of attention. It's not that they don't have attention, it's they don't know how to regulate it, what to pay attention to. That also happens on the neuron level. I believe I covered that also a little bit, talked about it in part 1, which has to do with how the neurons fire off. What's the timing? It's all milliseconds. But if those neurons don't work like they should, there are learning disabilities. The child has a hard time remembering things. It's all on the neuron level. Dyslexia, difficulties with reading, and dysgraphia, difficulties with handwriting, difficulties remembering spelling, and all of these learning disabilities, learning difficulties, are on the neuron level. In adolescence, the neurons are still forming. We are learning our entire lives, and new connections are being made. Every day you're awake, new connections are being made. We have 85 billion neurons, and each neuron has thousands and thousands of these dendrites. So it's a virtual forest that keeps growing and growing and associating, and we have so many parts of our brain. It is quite, that is a miracle and amazing. But when kids hit adolescence, it's called an explosion of synapse. They have different areas that open up that they can now learn even more. And if they don't learn, for example, a new language, it's harder for them to learn after adolescence, as you know. And adolescent boys have a difficult time, particularly statistically, with predicting if I put my foot on the gas, will I go fast and kill somebody or not? Which is why insurance for cars is higher for adolescent boys, because those neurons are not finished. Yet not till the age of about 24, 25 do boys' brains really mature. And we're talking about a neuron level. So neurons in babies are just incredible. And sometimes things go wrong, and we pray that things will go right. And that's it. Next slide. So you were exposed to part 1 and part 2. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you learned something new that you might not have known about. When I learned about this in Mahon Weizmann, I was quite incredulous. And the lecturer professor said, "You are looking at memory." He showed us pictures of neurons, as I was doing to you. And I just could not believe it. I've been a special ed teacher, and I understand that people learn differently, but I never knew it was on the neuron level. So I hope it has been useful for you. And part of your work, part of the assignment is, how does this knowledge from part 1 and part 2 change you as a teacher of struggling learners? So I hope you have learned something. I hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll talk soon.